What if the person you trusted most had been planning your financial erasure for over a year, quietly, carefully, while smiling across the dinner table? I'm Michael Trager. I'm 52 years old, a cybersecurity consultant, and for the last 14 years I believed I was in a solid, if not perfect, marriage. My wife Chloe, a wellness entrepreneur with thousands of online followers, always said she wanted peace, balance, and authenticity. What I didn't know was that behind the yoga retreats and green smoothies, something far more calculated was unfolding. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a story about quiet awareness, strategic protection, and the moment a man chooses dignity over destruction. Because when she left for Sedona on her so-called wellness retreat, she didn't expect I'd been watching, listening, preparing, and when she returned, everything she'd built on my trust began to unravel. If you've ever had the feeling that something wasn't right, but you kept giving the benefit of the doubt, this story is for you. Stay with me until the end, and if any part of this resonates, don't forget to like, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more stories that uncover the truth behind the silence. I met Chloe in the most unassuming way possible, at a local fundraiser for a community art program in downtown Austin. She was magnetic in that room, all soft laughter and sparkling eyes, the kind of woman who made you feel like you were the only person worth listening to. I was there because one of my corporate clients was a sponsor. She was there doing yoga, demonstrations, and handing out flyers for her boutique wellness brand. We talked over sparkling water and paper-thin cucumber slices. By the end of the night, she'd slipped her number into my hand with a wink. At the time, I was 38, and already past the phase of confusing charm with character. I'd spent a decade in cybersecurity, government contracts, then corporate forensics, then private consulting. Trust for me was something earned in data patterns and verified credentials. But Chloe didn't feel like a risk. She felt like a breath of something light in a world I'd grown used to auditing line by line. We dated for a year before getting married. She moved into my Westlake condo, which overlooked Lady Bird Lake, and gradually brought in her touches: sage candles, copper bowls, floor pillows, and Himalayan salt lamps. At first it was charming, organic. Then it became the norm. Chloe had ambition. I admired that. When she said she wanted to open a brick-and-mortar studio, I wrote the first check. When she needed digital infrastructure, I built it. I was the man behind the curtain, coding payment platforms, securing customer data, designing her email funnels while she posted sunlit photos of green smoothies and daily affirmations. She rarely asked how things worked, only that they did work, and I was fine with that for a while. My work demanded precision, discretion, and the ability to think 6 steps ahead of anyone trying to deceive the system. In relationships, though, I chose a more trusting approach. Or maybe I just wanted to believe that someone who preached so much about balance and alignment wouldn't be capable of deception. The first shift was subtle, a retreat to Big Sur that got extended by 3 days without warning. Client dinner where she showed up wearing a dress I'd never seen, one I later found tagged in someone else's Instagram story. I noticed her growing discomfort whenever I asked about her schedule, her hesitation when unlocking her phone in front of me, her changing passwords. Still, I said nothing. Not because I didn't notice, but because I was watching, measuring. I was trained to interpret patterns, and what I saw was a pattern of growing distance disguised as independence. Chloe often spoke of space and growth, and I gave her both, while quietly building a digital firewall around everything that bore my name. By year 12, we lived in a sleek modern home on the outskirts of the city, courtesy of a low-interest refinance I'd negotiated myself. She had 2 assistants, a growing following, and a wellness app in beta. I had contracts with fintech startups, NDAs in triplicate, and a virtual server network with more redundancy than the average private bank. We were, to the outside world, a well-matched pair, and perhaps for a time we were. But underneath the curated perfection, I could feel it, something shifting in the code of our connection. Her words were warm, but her eyes had started scanning the horizon. Her phone calls became quieter and her travels more frequent. Still, I waited, Because sometimes, letting someone show you who they are is more powerful than any confrontation, and I had no intention of acting until the night she slipped up. It happened gradually, like a slow leak in a sealed room. You don't notice the air disappearing until it's hard to breathe. By our 13th year of marriage, Chloe had fully leaned into her identity as a wellness influencer. Her Instagram bio read, Holistic Healer, Conscious Creator, Soul-Aligned CEO, and her content had evolved from simple yoga poses to high-production video snippets featuring crystal sound baths, cacao ceremonies, and cold plunges in Icelandic waterfalls. Her captions were always poetic, sometimes cryptic, and increasingly devoid of any reference to me. At home, she became more abstract, like someone performing intimacy rather than living it. She'd float into the house after long trips to Tulum, Sedona, Costa Rica, dropping her bags by the door with casual grace. It was transformative, she'd say, kissing me absently on the cheek. I'd ask how the retreat went, who she met, what she learned. Her answers were vague, almost rehearsed. You wouldn't really get it, babe. It's more of a somatic thing. I stopped pressing, but I started logging. My background taught me that sometimes the most dangerous breaches come not from outside attacks, but from trusted access. So I set quiet parameters. I created a cloned instance of our home network and ran all connected devices through a proxy filter. I mirrored her cloud backups, not to read every message, but to log access patterns. I wasn't looking for scandal. I was looking for motive, for momentum, for a blueprint of intent. And the data started painting. A picture, a pattern of late-night messages to a burner number in California, frequent searches for things like how to transfer assets anonymously, cryptocurrency wallets for couples, and bank accounts without spousal consent. A Venmo transaction labeled retreat prep sent to a man named Damon Reyes, someone I vaguely remembered from one of her Instagram lives. Tall, tanned, hyper-confident. A self-proclaimed biohacking alchemist who once explained how infrared saunas could align your spiritual DNA. Still, none of it was definitive. Not until I stumbled on a folder in her synced Google Drive labeled simply Freedom. Inside were PDFs of business incorporation documents, an LLC filed in Nevada using a residential P.O. box, a business bank account application listing her as primary owner and me as secondary guarantor. But I'd never seen it, never signed it. My digital signature had been lifted from a previous document and attached using a basic PDF editor. Sloppy, almost insulting. That night, I lay awake next to her in silence, the blue glow of her phone reflecting faintly off the ceiling. I watched her thumb glide across the screen, laughing softly at something unseen. She didn't know I was fully awake, didn't know that I'd already copied the contents of her Freedom folder to an encrypted drive, that I'd already contacted my lawyer and scheduled a preliminary asset protection consultation. The next morning, she mentioned a new retreat. 7 days in Sedona, she said, pouring her flaxseed smoothie into a recycled mason jar. I really need it. My body's been holding so much tension lately. I smiled and nodded. You should go. That evening, I called my brother Jonah. He works in enterprise risk analytics, and we'd always had a quiet agreement. If either of us ever saw something coming that looked like more than just trouble, we'd help each other create a controlled burn. It's time, I told him, my voice steady. He didn't even ask why, just said, I'll bring the hard drive tomorrow. Chloe left on a Thursday morning, breezing through the house in linen pants and oversized sunglasses, her yoga mat strapped to a designer duffel. She kissed me on the cheek and whispered, Don't work too hard while I'm gone, as if we were still playing the part of affectionate spouses. I watched her car disappear down the driveway, then walked back into the house and locked the front door, not out of habit, but to mark the moment the game officially began. By noon, I received an email. At first glance, it seemed like spam. No. Subject line, a single attachment, and the words, I'm ready. But when I opened the PDF, my chest tightened. It was a scanned copy of a transfer authorization form, signed with my forged signature, showing $143,000 wired from our joint savings into an account under the name Cove Rise Collective. A quick search revealed it was a new age wellness startup Chloe had referenced in passing weeks ago, framed as a visionary investment in conscious leadership. I checked the timestamp on the form. It had been processed 34 minutes after she left the house. I sat there for a long moment, then opened the drawer beside me and pulled out a slim black folder labeled Protocol Vega. It wasn't a joke. It was the contingency I'd built over the past year, not out of paranoia but pattern recognition. When you work in cybersecurity long enough, you understand that betrayal is rarely abrupt. It's cumulative, camouflaged, and always detectable if you know where to look. First, I triggered the two-step lockdown protocol I'd designed with Jonah. A single encrypted command shut down access to our shared financial dashboards, revoked her credentials from all personal cloud accounts, and activated a monitoring script across her business backend. Then I called my lawyer Nadine and forwarded her the forged transfer document. "I'm going to need a fraud claim filed by end of day," I said calmly, "and a motion to freeze all marital accounts within the hour." She didn't ask questions. She'd seen the signs when we first met 6 months earlier to quietly draft an emergency asset protection plan. She simply said, "I'll send the paperwork. Check your inbox in 5. Within an hour, Chloe's access to anything tied to my name, banking apps, cards, property files, was disabled. The $143,000 transfer was flagged and held pending investigation. The account it had been wired to had been opened under her LLC just 2 days prior. Sloppy again. She never expected me to look this deeply or act this fast. I opened her business email, accessed via a shared admin portal she'd never thought to update, and found the final insult, an email chain between her and Damon Reyes, discussing launch timelines, shared visions, and ways to legally minimize Michael's visibility. The tone was smug, careless. In one email, Damon wrote, "Once this is finalized, we ghost him and go all in on the rebrand." Chloe had replied, "Already planning the escape. House deed in process. He won't know what hit him." But I did. And I was already 10 steps ahead. I reached out to a former colleague at a fintech firm in Nevada, asking him to pull a soft trace on the Kovrise account. Within minutes, he confirmed the deposit had not yet cleared due to flagged inconsistencies. That gave me just enough time to file a formal dispute and notify the compliance team. I uploaded all documentation, Chloe's fake signature, the IP address where the document was uploaded, metadata from the forged PDF. Then I walked into the kitchen, made myself a coffee, and stared at the empty space where Chloe's favorite plants used to sit. She'd taken them, I realized, probably loaded them into her car while I was on a call yesterday. The gesture was small, but it struck a nerve, like someone peeling away pieces of your identity without asking. But I wasn't angry. I was focused. Everything was unfolding, exactly as it needed to. The difference was, she thought she was the one making the first move. She didn't realize the game had already started, and that she was walking into a board I'd designed. That same evening, as Chloe likely settled into her eco-resort suite surrounded by crystals and chanting voices, I sat in my office with Jonah, reviewing every financial and digital footprint she had left behind. My brother's background in enterprise risk analytics made him the perfect co-pilot for this kind of operation, efficient, unsentimental, and ruthless when needed. He booted up a portable system he'd built for data tracing and quietly said, "Let's see where the body's buried." We started with the Nevada-based Kovrise Collective account. While the surface showed a clean LLC registration, Jonah dug into the back-end and cross-referenced account holders, payment origins, and shell transfers. It didn't take long to find that Kovrise had received 2 other deposits in the past 90 days. $12,000 from an anonymous crypto wallet traced to Singapore, and $27,000 from a checking account Chloe opened in California under her maiden name. That account was never disclosed to me. It had been feeding small transfers from our household budget for nearly a year. $300 here, $500 there, always labeled as studio expenses, coaching retreats, or marketing budgets. It was death by 1,000. Withdrawals. Jonah paused the screen. "This guy, Damon," he muttered, opening a browser tab filled with links to Damon Reyes's biohacking empire. The man was all veneers and testosterone, pitching snake oil in the language of self-optimization. One video showed him leading an ice bath seminar while shouting affirmations about cellular rebirth. "You want me to run a full background?" I nodded. "Everything. Business loans, assets, affiliations, any shady history that could tie Chloe to liability." 3 hours later, we had more than I expected. Damon's so-called company, Reyes Vitality Systems, was leveraged to the brink. He had 3 business credit cards, each maxed out, equipment leases he hadn't paid in months, a defaulted short-term loan from an alternative lender at 18% interest. Even more alarming, Chloe had co-signed a $120,000 lease for a commercial building in downtown Santa Fe, intended for their new co-conscious healing space. She'd also used our home equity, without my knowledge, as collateral on a loan for $175,000 worth of equipment imported from Switzerland. "She filed as your spouse on the application," Jonah said, turning his monitor toward me. "Legally, you're liable." I leaned back in my chair. My heart didn't race. My breath didn't quicken. I just felt still, as if a final puzzle piece had clicked into place. "She didn't just plan to leave," I said. "She planned to leave after transferring every risk onto my name. She used my credit, my assets, and my silence." Jonah nodded grimly. "She figured you'd stay calm, not make a scene, that you'd take the loss." "She's not entirely wrong," I replied. "But what she miscalculated, what they both did, is thinking calm means passive. I've been quiet, not because I'm weak, but because I've been listening." At that point, I knew what needed to happen. I reached out to Nadine again. I want an emergency injunction to freeze all marital assets tied to any co-signed documents. Every line of credit, every business lease, every home equity claim. If she's used my name or status for collateral, I want it off the table. "Understood," she said. "I'll have it filed by noon tomorrow." Next, I sent a certified legal notice to the Cove Rise Collective's account holders, Chloe and Damon, stating that any continued use of funds acquired through fraudulent authorization would be considered financial misconduct. I also contacted 3 major equipment suppliers Damon had posted about publicly, forwarding copies of the now contested contracts and alerting them to a pending fraud investigation. Then I logged into Chloe's influencer marketing dashboard, something I had helped her set up years ago, and paused every campaign that was tied to our shared bank accounts or payment cards, affiliate links, ad revenue, merchant partners. Within minutes, her business cash flow slowed to a trickle. It wasn't about revenge. It was about leverage. Chloe believed she was building her freedom on my foundation. What she hadn't considered was that the moment I withdrew my support, everything she'd stacked on top of me would begin to collapse, and that collapse had just begun. That night, after Jonah left and the house fell quiet, I poured myself a drink, not out of celebration but as a ritual of grounding. I sat alone in the living room, staring at the framed photo of Chloe and me at Lake Como, taken 8 years ago. She had her arms around my shoulders, head resting gently against mine, both of us laughing. I remembered how genuine that moment had felt. And for the first time since this ordeal began, I allowed myself to mourn, not just the betrayal, but the illusion we'd built together. I took the photo down and placed it face down on the table. Then, I walked into the study and opened the drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a leather-bound journal that had belonged to my father. He'd been a carpenter by trade, a man of few words but deep thoughts. After he passed, I'd kept the journal, though I'd never fully read through it. That night I did. On one of the pages he'd written in careful, angular print, "Trust doesn't mean you assume the best. It means you're ready for the truth, whatever it is." The words hit differently now. My father had seen the world through a lens of hard-earned wisdom. He'd warned me once, long before I married Chloe, that people who take without asking will always find a new way to extract. At the time, I thought he was being cynical, but now I understood. He wasn't warning me out of bitterness. He was preparing me for clarity. I spent the next morning cataloging what I had lost. Not financially, I'd already taken steps to recover most of that. But emotionally, memories now stained with doubt. Gestures that once felt sincere now replayed like theater. Even her voice echoing in old voicemails carried a different weight. Still, I refused to let bitterness take root. That afternoon, I went to visit my mother. She still lived in the same modest house on the east side, surrounded by rose bushes and faded lawn ornaments. When I walked in, she greeted me with a long, knowing hug. "She's gone, isn't she?" she asked softly. I nodded. "And the money?" "She tried," I said, "but she didn't get far." We sat on the porch for a while, sipping tea. My mother didn't ask for details. She just listened. Eventually, she said, "Your father used to say, when people show you their hands, don't argue with the cards they've played. Just decide if you want to keep sitting at that table." I stayed with her until the sun began to set, and then I drove back to the house. It was only when I stepped through the door that I noticed something I hadn't before. The emptiness felt cleaner now. Not cold, but cleared, as if the house itself had let out a breath. I walked into Chloe's old office, which I hadn't entered in weeks. Most of her things were gone, likely taken during her last few days at home, but on the bookshelf behind a row of wellness books I found a manila envelope labeled private. Inside were sketches for her new studio, mood boards and handwritten notes. Soft opening April. Invite-only launch party. Damon VIP list. But what struck me wasn't what she planned. It was what she didn't. There were no legal contingencies, no documentation, no financial records. It was all built on the assumption that I would stay quiet, stay still, stay predictable. She'd mistaken stillness for weakness. I closed the envelope and put it aside. Then I opened my laptop, checked the latest updates from Nadine, and saw that the court had approved the emergency freeze on all marital assets tied to her business activities. It was done. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm. And I knew, whatever storm came next, I had already anchored myself. 2 days later, Chloe returned, earlier than scheduled. I heard the tires of her Lexus roll into the driveway around noon, a full day before the Sedona retreat was supposed to end. I was upstairs in my home office reviewing a new draft of the asset protection order when the doorbell rang. I didn't answer right away. I let the chime echo through the empty house before walking slowly downstairs. She stood on the porch, still dressed in flowing linen, her hair tied back in a casual bun that felt more curated than effortless. The moment she saw me, her expression flickered, something between charm and calculation. "Michael," she said, her voice warm, a touch too bright. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside without a word and let her in. She moved through the foyer, as if the house still belonged to her, pausing briefly to glance at the bare shelves in the living room. Then she turned to face me. "There's been a misunderstanding," she began. "I tried using our card and it was declined. Then I checked my account, and the wire transfer hasn't cleared. I think there's something wrong with the bank." I said nothing. I simply walked to the kitchen counter, opened a drawer and handed her a folder. Inside were copies of everything: the forged transfer form, the flagged transactions, the property liens filed without my consent, and the court's emergency freeze order. She flipped through the pages quickly, her eyes narrowing with each new revelation. "You froze our accounts?" she asked, her voice now laced with tension. "I protected my assets," I replied evenly. "The accounts were being used for unauthorized activity. Legally, I had every right." She closed the folder and placed it carefully on the counter. The calm exterior began to crack. "You can't do this to me," she said. "I have obligations. I've already put down payments for equipment, leases, Damon's expansion." "I know," I said, cutting her off. "I know about all of it and the co-signed loans and the equipment deal where you used our home as collateral, without my knowledge." Her eyes went wide. "You've been spying on me?" "No," I replied. "I've been protecting myself. There's a difference." She stepped closer, dropping her voice. Michael, listen to me. This isn't what you think. Damon and I, this isn't about betrayal. It's about growth. About following a path that aligns with who I am now. You've been distant, buried in your work. I held up a hand. Don't spin this. You forged my signature. You hid funds. You planned to leave and take everything with you, including liabilities that would have ruined me. There was a beat of silence. Her tone hardened. If you think I'm walking away, with nothing, you're wrong. I built my business from the ground up. With my resources, I reminded her. With platforms I designed, money I invested, and trust I extended. You'll regret this, she snapped. No, I said. I regret not acting sooner. She turned, walking toward the door, then paused. And what about Damon? Are you planning to destroy him too? I'm not planning anything, I said calmly. But the banks are. Once they realize those loans were based on fraudulent collateral, they'll act accordingly, and they won't be as patient as I've been. She said nothing more. Just stared at me for a moment as if seeing me for the first time not as the dependable, agreeable husband, but as the man who had quietly prepared for every eventuality. Then, she walked out. I closed the door behind her and leaned against the frame. No anger, no shaking hands, just clarity. She came home expecting chaos. She found order. And for the first time in our entire marriage, she understood exactly what I was capable of. The next morning, as expected, the fallout began. My phone buzzed, with a flood of notifications, first from Chloe's number, then from unfamiliar ones. Mutual friends, business acquaintances, even 2 of her studio clients reached out, each with some version of the same message. What's going on? Chloe's saying you sabotaged her business, and I thought you 2 were solid. She was spinning the story fast. I didn't respond. I knew the script. When people like Chloe lose control, their next move is often social, emotionally, framing the situation in a way that paints themselves as victims of cruelty, not consequences. I wasn't surprised to hear that she was claiming the account freeze was a retaliatory stunt, that she'd been blindsided, and that she was just trying to build something meaningful. The truth would take longer to spread than the drama, but truth has one advantage. It holds. By midday, Nadine called. Michael, you need to see this, she said. I opened the document she sent. It was a breakdown from her forensic accountant team. Over the past 14 months, Chloe had siphoned more than $82,000 from our joint accounts into personal and business expenses unrelated to anything she'd disclosed. Some transfers were as small as $180, others as high as $4,000, all structured to avoid triggering automatic fraud alerts. It was methodical. She's been planning this longer than I thought, I muttered. Yes, Nadine said, her tone clipped. And she left a digital trail a mile wide. I asked about the legality of using my name for the Santa Fe property collateral. It's fraud, she replied. And with the forged signature on the bank documents, it escalates to criminal intent. The equipment vendors are already on alert. I leaned back in my chair, watching the pieces move into place. Chloe's version of independence had come, at the cost of integrity, and now it was collapsing. But the next move surprised even me. That evening I received a text from an unknown number. It read, "You need to stop. Chloe deserves better than this. Don't make things uglier than they need to be." No signature, no context, but I didn't need one. Damon Reyes had entered the chat. I didn't reply. Instead, I flagged the number, archived the message, and added it to the growing evidence package Nadine was preparing. The timing was telling. He knew, or at least he was beginning to understand the scale of what was unraveling. I drove out, to my brother Jonah's place the next morning. He greeted me with a mug of coffee and a raised eyebrow. "You want to go full burn?" he asked. "Just public records," I replied. "Nothing illegal. I just want to see how much of his house is built on sand." We ran the standard suite: court records, UCC filings, business licenses, debt-to-income ratios, and public affiliations. It didn't take long. Damon had an impressive surface, clean branding, a couple of investor testimonials, curated press, clippings, but under that polish was a storm. He was behind on rent at 2 satellite studios. One of his businesses had lost a civil suit last year over unpaid wages. He owed back taxes on contractor payments. And the most damning, his flagship equipment was listed as collateral for a loan that had already been sold to a debt buyer. If Chloe thought she was attaching herself to a rising empire, she hadn't looked at the foundation. She bet everything on this guy, Jonah said, shaking his head. No, I corrected him. She bet everything with me, without asking. That afternoon, I met Nadine in person to finalize the affidavit for court. We discussed the fraud angle, the timeline of asset movement, and the digital evidence package. She paused before leaving and asked, "Do you want to press for criminal charges?" I looked out the window. The sky was pale blue, clear. "Not yet," I said. "Let's give them time to panic first." Because panic, unlike truth, leaves a trail you can follow all the way to the end. 2 days later, that panic arrived, loud, desperate, and fully public. Chloe showed up unannounced at my office. It was late morning, and I was in a meeting when my assistant buzzed through, her voice uncertain. "She's here. Says it's urgent." I told her to let Chloe wait. When I finally stepped into the lobby, Chloe was pacing. Her eyes were tired, her makeup heavier than usual, like she was trying to mask the erosion beneath the surface. She held her phone in one hand, a printed document in the other. The moment she saw me, she launched into her performance. The bank called. Damon's loans are being recalled. They're seizing the equipment. Everything we built is falling, apart because of you. I didn't flinch. "No," I said, keeping my voice low. "Everything is falling apart because of what you built on lies, forged documents, and stolen assets. You're destroying him to get back at me." "I'm not destroying anyone," I replied. "The banks are." I simply stepped aside and let your fraud speak for itself. She tried to pivot. Her voice softened, eyes glossed. "Can we please talk? Just you and me. Come home. We'll figure this out. None of this has to be permanent." I recognized that tone. The same one she used when she wanted to avoid accountability. But there was no coming back from this. I had watched her manipulate, conceal, fabricate, and when it stopped working, she simply tried to charm her way out. But charm had an expiration date, and hers had run out. "There's nothing to work out," I said. "The divorce will proceed. The fraud investigation is out of my hands, and if Damon wants to call me again, he should use his real number." She blinked. The mask faltered. I walked away without waiting for her response. Later that afternoon, Nadine called with news. The court had granted full emergency protection on all contested assets, including our shared real estate and any property tied to fraudulent financing. Chloe was officially locked out. No access to business funds, no leverage through joint accounts. A day after that, she tried to file a temporary injunction against the asset freeze, claiming I was acting out of spite. The judge denied it instantly, citing overwhelming evidence of misconduct. Damon, meanwhile, had gone silent online. His brand's Instagram went dark. His studio's Yelp page exploded with 1-star reviews after a whistleblower, someone who had likely seen Chloe's panic, leaked internal emails showing unpaid staff and bounced vendor payments. Whatever illusion he had been selling was unraveling. Fast, and then came the final blow. Nadine forwarded me a new email. Chloe's lawyer had sent a demand for mediation, hoping to resolve things amicably and avoid further reputational damage. Translation: the walls were closing in, and they wanted a deal. I agreed, but on my terms. The mediation took place in a neutral office downtown, a conference room with glass walls and sharp acoustics. Chloe walked in dressed for sympathy, subtle jewelry, a muted dress, a carefully rehearsed expression of contrition. Her lawyer opened the conversation. "My client acknowledges there were missteps, but she is committed to moving forward and hopes Mr. Trager can be reasonable in the division of assets." Nadine didn't flinch. She slid a document across the table. "The financial audit is complete. Chloe used Michael's identity to co-sign 3 high-risk business loans. forged his signature on legal documents, and siphoned over $80,000 from joint accounts. The banks have begun repossession. The fraud has been referred to the district attorney. This meeting is a courtesy. The room went quiet. Chloe's lawyer went pale. We'll need time to review. Of course, Nadine said. But know this. If Ms. Trager signs today's settlement, Michael is prepared to submit a statement that may mitigate further criminal implications. No theft charges, no civil suits. Walk away. Quietly. I looked at Chloe. She couldn't hold eye contact. The woman who once moved through the world with certainty now sat frozen, surrounded by the ruins of her own design. She signed. Without another word, and just like that, 15 years of illusion ended with a ballpoint pen and a silent acknowledgement of the truth. After the mediation, I stepped out into the late afternoon light. The sky was overcast, but I felt lighter than I had in months. Chloe and her attorney stayed behind, no doubt scrambling to salvage what they could, her reputation, her business, the remnants of her carefully curated life. But the damage was done. The banks had been notified, the vendors were already pulling out, and the legal trail she left behind was far too wide to cover with yoga mantras and photo filters. In the weeks that followed, the collapse continued, not through explosions, but erosion. Silent and systematic. Chloe moved out of the city. Rumor had it she relocated to a healing collective in New Mexico. Her social media presence shifted from polished professionalism to vague, self-reflective quotes over pastel backgrounds. Phrases like, "Sometimes growth means losing everything," and "The universe removes what no longer serves you." None of them mentioned the lawsuits, the debt collectors, or the public statement her former clients posted, denouncing her for ethical breaches. As for Damon, he disappeared entirely. His gym was sold at auction to cover his outstanding debts. The Santa Fe lease defaulted. His accounts were seized and 3 vendors filed civil claims for unpaid invoices. I later learned that he'd tried to pivot into online coaching, but with Chloe's scandal dragging his name through every fitness forum, his credibility was radioactive. Last I heard, he'd left the country. Some said Bali, others Mexico. It didn't matter. They had both bet on a fantasy. And reality had finally answered. Meanwhile, I moved on with quiet clarity. I sold the house Chloe and I had once shared and bought a smaller property in the foothills near a lake. Not flashy, just peaceful. A place where I could hear my own thoughts. Again. I spent my mornings walking wooded trails, my evenings restoring the antique boat my father left behind. I rebuilt not just my space but my rhythm, day by day, without noise, without spectacle. Some nights I'd catch myself wondering, had it always been headed here? Were the warning signs truly invisible, or had I simply chosen not to see them? Truth is, I did see them. I just didn't want to believe that someone I had supported so completely, financially, emotionally, structurally, would weaponize that trust. But people show you who they are. Eventually. And when they do, your job isn't to argue, it's to decide what you'll tolerate. Jonah came by one weekend to help finish sealing the dock. We worked in comfortable silence, the way only brothers can. When we took a break, he handed me a beer and said, "You know, you could have dragged her through the mud. Press charges made her a headline." I took a sip and shrugged. "What would have been the point? You had every right," he said. "Sure," I replied. "But justice doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes the quiet consequences are the ones people never see coming." He nodded. "Dad would have liked this place." "Yeah," I said, watching the sun set over the lake. "He would have." That night I sat on the back porch, the journal still on my lap. I flipped through the pages again, letting my father's words anchor me. "Let them lie. You build truth." And that's what I had done. Not by fighting fire with fire, but by letting the fire burn itself out. No anger, no revenge, just distance, truth, and peace. The kind of ending you don't brag about, but the kind you can live with. In the end, this wasn't a story about revenge. It was about foresight, about staying quiet long enough to see people reveal themselves, about choosing clarity over chaos, strategy over emotion, and dignity over drama. Chloe believed she could outmaneuver me because I didn't yell, didn't threaten, didn't confront. What she never understood was that silence isn't weakness, it's calculation. And sometimes the most powerful response is preparation. When trust is broken, many people rush to reclaim control through force. I didn't need to. I had already laid the groundwork. The truth handled the rest. And that truth, once it surfaced, didn't just expose what had been done to me. It revealed who I had become because of it. There are moments in life when you'll face betrayal, not just of the heart, but of your name, your work, your legacy. In those moments, how you respond defines more than just your outcome. It defines your character. You can burn everything down, or you can build something stronger in its place. I chose to build. If you've ever felt the slow sting of manipulation, or watched someone you trusted dismantle the life you shared, know this: you are not powerless. You are not alone. And you have more strength than you realize, especially when you stay calm, gather truth, and act with precision. If this story resonated with you, or reminded you of something you've experienced or witnessed, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you believe in silent strength, and subscribe if you're ready for more stories about justice, clarity, and emotional resilience. Your voice matters, and I read every word.